everybody, it's Susan Lindner. I'm your host of the Innovation Storytellers show, and it's time to tune in to some electricity. I still remember that from like Conjunction Junction and all of that goodness. My guest today is Eli Gerson, who is what I think one of the most foremost thinkers at a regulated utility who is trying desperately to push open the box and bring brilliant new ideas to what we think of as regulated, potentially stale, potentially mundane. We think we know what's going on inside of a regulated utility. We might think that it's not the hub of innovation that it is, but it really is. And so I've had the good fortune of working closely with Eli on all things innovation storytelling, but I wanted to actually bring this story to the fore. And so Eli, welcome to the show again. It's my desire to have you back on because I think things are happening by leaps and bounds inside of electrification and all that permeates in our world as we hear more about sustainability, electric vehicles. I'm sure about half my audience probably drives an electric or a hybrid vehicle at this point. And so why not go directly to the source and tell us exactly what's happening behind the scenes inside of the utility industry. So welcome back.
Well, it's great to be back. Thanks for having me.
So let's get started at the beginning. For those of my listeners who aren't familiar with Ameren, can you give us a little bit of background on the company?
Yeah, Ameren is headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri. We are a investor-owned utility. We have around 1.2 million electric customers in Missouri, most of those kind of in the eastern half of the state. The same amount of electric customers in Illinois as well. Kind of the lower 3/4 geographically of Illinois. And we have around 1 million natural gas customers, with around 90% of those in Illinois. We also have a transmission business as well. And you're right, there is a ton happening right now in the electrification space and just more broadly in the energy transition or transformation space. You're hearing a lot about from utilities and companies in the space around our fuel mix, pledges around when we will go to net carbon goals, et cetera. Things are happening and moving very, very quickly in this space. So it's a fun time to be innovating here.
Yeah, I love this idea. Like, you don't really think of your utility as kind of the hub for innovation. But I mean, it really, when you start thinking about smart cities, right, and the spoke that comes out of that, you think about wireless meters and just the whole metering system of how we're getting our electricity, how lines are being laid and poles are being, holes for poles are being dug these days. And even drones, becoming part and parcel of the infrastructure of a utility. It really is happening quite quickly.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things driving change, trying to be more efficient in our, how we're using the capital to do these projects, how to do it more safely as well. So a lot of these around safe, and then a little bit less for our territory, fortunately, but especially being driven by places in the Southwest, things like wildfires and challenges to our built infrastructure, driving a lot of change into, in some cases, what has been kind of static solutions for, in some cases, hundreds of years. So trying to find novel solutions to things we've taken for granted for a long time with these. So yeah, there's a lot of change afoot.
I think we have to call this episode Beyond Edison.
Yeah.
Really think there's so much happening beyond the original innovators in the space or the creators in the space. So let's start at the baby end of the spectrum. So let's talk about how startups are working with utilities these days and how we'd like them to. I know you're involved with several different initiatives that really help signal the market about what utilities need and what's coming next.
Yeah. So one thing that's difficult, and I believe we touched on this in our last one, is that it's really difficult for startups in general to work with utilities. Not unique just to our own space. I think, a lot of different industries kind of joke, although that's not too funny. We know that the joke is a real pain, healthcare, education, government, et cetera. There's, we're not the only one that faces these challenges, but we put a big burden on working with us, whether that's through our sourcing, whether that's through the legal elements or different timelines, what requirements we might have. It's really, really difficult. So our team specifically, and kind of more innovation teams or our equivalents, are one of the few places that can work with kind of smaller teams. So sometimes that is with really small pilots, often kind of off network, that kind of can take some of those considerations off and really kind of test technologies and opportunities in unique ways. But that's kind of a smaller effort in our own kind of sometimes Herculean efforts to try to get that past our own processes. So if anyone's listening and is a startup in the space or looking for solutions, please look up Incubate Energy Labs. But we put out there what some of our challenges are, and it also encourages and is set up in a way that all of the participating, whether you're a host running challenges or if you're just participating, you can collaborate. You can be part of kind of those weekly or bi-weekly calls and kind of participate at different levels and kind of be part of the learnings. And that's a really exciting way to kind of break some of that staleness and kind of silos that exists. And it's been really successful. This is the fourth year. This was the fourth year of doing that. And even through COVID, it has been quite successful. It was exciting to be back in person for this year. So that's been a really exciting challenge and way to do that. These is 16-week challenges. So
it's like a sprint, right? For these
yeah,
startups.
it really is. It really is a sprint. So before that, there's, do kind of the onboarding and some of the work to get everything squared away, and these really quick challenges, and then the demo day for it. Now there's a little bit of cheating. So we hosted 3 projects, and all of them have little pieces at least that are continuing on. But it's a really fun way, at the very least, to get kind of the foot in the door for a lot of these companies, which is really important.
So what were some of those that stood out for you that you really think have a shot?
Well, we hosted 3 projects. Maybe I'll touch on those and brag on our own. So I'll go alphabetically. We did one with a company called Electrification, and one of their solutions is they're in the charging space, and they have a hardware solution for bringing a charging to areas that don't have the grid capacity to meet that quickly. And it seems like a very neat solution, although given the timeline and hardware is a tough one to test in that. We actually were interested in their software. So we were looking at modeling our grid. Unfortunately, didn't have our hosting capacity in some of those elements, but looked at some grid factors and reliability factors, things like outages, et cetera, and paired that with data they had and were pulling on socioeconomic and climate factors, et cetera. And they were assessing areas that would be ideal for charging locations based on those combined factors, which was really interesting because usually that's really just grid level data or solely from customer data. Now for us, we are not as from our utility able to own or operate our charging network. We can do that for our own fleets and usage. So there's not necessarily that one-to-one, like we can take this and use that as a tool to use this on our own, but really interesting to see, is this something we could use this platform to talk to customers, whether that's a community stakeholder group, city, nonprofit, whatever it might be, around their goals or interests, and kind of providing this platform as a kind of, an element of truth that we can hold and kind of everyone speaking the same language around in a way that's quite different than just saying, well, here's the grid, or here's what we're doing, or here are these different factors, and we can kind of manipulate it in different ways to suit those needs. So I think that's quite promising and quite interesting. And I think their hardware is something to track as well. Definitely need a lot of solutions to bring charging accessibility is something that's really important. We did a project with a company called Singularity. This is a really interesting one as well. They worked for us. They actually did projects with 4 different utilities. So they kind of started in that way. They worked with a customer of ours around a dashboard around decarbonization planning. So that really means how can they lower their carbon intensity of their usage across their building or their buildings or their footprints. And that was really interesting to get that customer feedback. We're going to continue working with them and trying to understand how that what it is that customers want or how they could use that and how we can leverage that to potentially design better programs, products, or services, or better inform customers. Also, some of their technologies and use cases can be for our own tracking or reporting on our own end. The getting real granular data on your true intensity of your carbon on site is actually a little bit trickier than you would probably think, and trying to have some of that is really interesting to look at and try to work on. There's been a trend recently now, mostly by really large players, Google, Microsoft, et cetera, who are really into and pushing and putting their money where their mouth is, and good for them around trying to remove all carbon emission, moving towards something called 24/7 CFE or 24/7 carbon-free energy, trying to really match kind of at an hourly or some level of saying that their load is truly coming from carbon-free sources. And tools and information like this could be really empowering towards the progression from where we are now on our grid towards that future. Certainly as Ameren and at this point, really all utilities have pledges, whether that's 2040, 2045, 2050 to be carbon free. From where we are now to there's going to be different bridge solutions to be cleaner in different ways and provide that to customers. And how do we do that? It's going to be really interesting to follow.
If I can just think about this for a sec. So, it seems like every sector is creating its own decarb tool. And, whether it's a giant consulting firm or whether it's, startups who are creating these tools or, like you said, Google and for their respective industries, do you think there is one universal tool for really doing this analysis, or do we need it by industry so that we can really get our arms around it?
Well, it depends, I think, on how individual customers are intending or meaning to meet their goals. So this is where some of it gets a little bit tricky on the sense of what does it truly mean for a specific customer to around their goals? Does it mean that they are truly consuming no electrons that came from any carbon source? Or does it mean that those came that some of those could have been captured in some ways? Or does that mean that there's some sort of, there were some carbon, but instead of that, there were offsets in some way? And what does that mean and how? So it is actually a much trickier question than you would probably think just by asking it.
Not to mention the supply chain that winds up backing up into it, right?
Yes. So like what level, like first, second, or third, like kind of level to that as well. So, and so, so it depends on what level of accountability for how far and what they mean by that and at what time. And it's also really tricky because some things you can control and some things are much more difficult. So it depends on how far they want to go. But I think the most important element, I think, is really getting data that you can believe and is and you can make your decisions off of in the right way. And that's, I think, really foundationally what we're looking and working with. And I think regardless of how you're making those decisions or what trade-offs or kind of framework you're thinking about, a solution like with Singularity could work for you, regardless of where you sit. And then the the last project is another fun one. It's called Zero Home. It happens to be piloting in Richmond Heights, Missouri, which is where I live. That's not why we did it, although it is a nice benefit to
That's a
me.
very nice perk.
Yeah, so I'll get into why we picked it in a minute, but I'll describe what they do. They've created a platform that is essentially kind of like a home energy audit. So I don't know if you have before, or anyone who's listening might have a true home energy audit, or you've seen it if you watch HGTV or something like that, where they kind of tarp the doors and put the fans and do the pressurization and figure out the R factor of windows and insulation and where there might be leaks, et cetera. And that's a pretty lengthy and kind of time consuming, difficult to navigate process. But it is, that's kind of the gold standard for a lot of this. What they are doing is they are taking data, basically what you'd see at, if you look at your home on Zillow or any of those sites where they're tying in the permitting data and stuff they're getting from the work you've done at your house or from your county, et cetera, from being assessed, 3D topographical data, and they're running models, and you're asked to say, how is your home heated, cooled, and hot water? And you can further go in the tool and say, hey, you said my home is this old. It's actually, this old, or you made the estimation that I have 2-pane windows. It's actually single pane, or based on the age of my home, you estimated that my roof insulation is this thick. It's really this thick. You could go in and make it, or say, here's the model of some of the appliances that drive a lot of that, and make it even more granular, but it gives these very specific recommendations for how you could improve from a carbon perspective and or a cost perspective for your home. And it's tied in. You can tie it in. For the purpose of the quick pilot, we weren't able to link it with our bills. You could do that, and you can also, and we did tie it into our energy efficiency rebates, and they have national rebates, et cetera. And it tells you what is the best things to do for your specific home. So what's the most cost-effective steps that you could take? And it gives you kind of an informed look at your home and decisions that you could take. So this will be really interesting to tackle. I think we've had somewhere between, 12 and 15% at this point of the residents of single family home is the target we have right now who have engaged with it, which is very high. And we picked the city because it has a kind of representative of socioeconomic and diversity, representative of our service territory, as well as kind of housing stock and good relationship and partnership with the city. So it's a really neat project, and we'll see if that can drive energy efficiency usage through driving from home improvement projects. That's one way, but we've also learned a lot around energy efficiency. Traditionally works from saying at scale, these efforts on average save X amount, and that is proven out, and you test that over time, but we don't know that for any individual home, right? So you could say on average this has this benefit, for whether that's HVAC or weatherization or whatever it might be, and it works well as an aggregated system. But as a homeowner, that might not be the best bang for the buck for your home. So we're learning a lot about what goes in, or what defines what might be best for different homes and for what reasons. So those insights, we're really digging into those to figure out what we can learn, how we can maybe better market or build programs, or think of products, programs within energy efficiency with some of that information, or scale that, or think about solutions in interesting ways moving forward. Really, really neat technology there.
So it's fascinating too, because I wonder how much of this demand is being driven by consumers themselves, who care about the climate, are looking for energy efficiency, and want to figure out how to take responsibility for their own carbon footprint. Are you seeing a trend in actually inbound pressure from customers for these kinds of solutions?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh.
And It depends on which customer and kind of what we can do and different opportunities for that, of course. But yes, and especially now, unfortunately, the with inflation and energy costs, it's a time that people are also a little bit more conscious of budgets. In the winter too, people tend to be a little bit higher bills and think more about it. But yes, overall, we do know that there are at least subsets of customers who are very conscious about not just based off of cost, but some of them are cost driven. But there's also a set that it's above and beyond cost that they'd pay in addition to the cost, would look for solutions based on climate, based on reducing their carbon footprint. And we see that within energy efficiency. It's not necessarily in the program design always, but certainly in what people are looking for. We see that within electric vehicles. The behavior that's driving people to purchase an EV is largely driven by a desire to be, lowering one's impact. That's a huge factor in individual choice to buy an EV. One element that we're seeing as well is there's starting to be a lot of thought around something called managed charging. So, once you own an EV, there's different levels of charging. You can plug it in, regular outlet, which is called level 1, or trickle charging, probably get a couple, 2-3 miles an hour added to your battery. Level is kind of the ones mostly that you'd see if you see at a station, or if people did an upgrade at their home, kind of the same level of, like, if you have a dryer, like that outlet's the same idea. And then level 3 is fast charging, which some places would have. You wouldn't have that at your home, and that would charge your car in an hour. But what's interesting is, and sometimes you see this, like if you see the Ford commercials and you see powering your house from your car, or like like you see like V2X or V2G, like vehicle to grid, vehicle to house.
Is that what the acronym is now? V to G, V to H?
Yeah. And that's kind of funny because in most cases, although you're like a Tesla is, I think, 3 or 4 times bigger than a Powerwall, like a Tesla. So it is a pretty substantial battery if it's fully done. And if you aggregate it, that's a lot of batteries. And if you think about a future where everyone or most people have an electric vehicle, that's a lot of power that's just sitting at any one time. But how long they could truly, power your whole home is kind of funny in some cases. But thinking about, how you power that both ways is really interesting. But also, if you want to just power your car overnight, well, different utilities, including us, there's different time of use rates where you can be incentivized to do that at different times of night, often when energy is cheapest, which usually coincides with the kind of greenest, but not always. Sometimes there are kind of green charges for it as well. But, we've seen in this managed chart, there are customers in polling or different places trying to understand this, where customers, we know that there are subsets of customers that will pay more if you manage it in such a way that they'll pay more to charge it overnight and manage it in such a manner that their carbon impact is less, not that their bill is less. So trying to understand the different behaviors is really interesting of different customers. And it can be difficult in the regulated sense with commissions to build products or services to meet all those customers. But that's certainly something that we are looking at, and most utilities are looking at how to try to meet that for customers. And then the other big place we see this and being driven is in a broader economic development sense from large businesses. One is, are companies growing? Are they going to continue to grow in your territory or move elsewhere, and where people are choosing to locate or grow into? If you don't have programs, products, tariffs, etc., designed that can make it either easier for them or more affordable for them, or whatever it might be, to lower their emissions from their sites or better understand that, they are making decisions based off of where to go based off of that. So especially things like data centers, large warehouses, etc., especially some of these, larger companies that have some of those climate initiatives, that we talked about, especially kind of in the tech industry in particular. That's a big factor. And, you see utilities that are doing better or worse based off of their ability to attract from a utility sense. That plays a big part, because energy and energy bills are a huge part of the business cases for their thinking.
So, I mean, those big companies are going to be driving so much of the massive impacts, right? But to your point, there's also a huge push on the consumer side of people who really want to see a difference on the climate and having their own impact in whatever way, even no matter how small, they want to be participating. But I want to shift the conversation a little bit to participating on a different scale and really getting out into communities. I mean, the charter of any utility is to support the electrification needs of all the communities that you serve. And so can we talk a little bit about DEI and what that really means in the context of electrification? I mean, I think COVID brought up so much inequality in the services that we take for granted. Whether it's like kids trying to get online and trying to attend school, whether it's, just having enough power to be able to get to the resources that we need or to upgrade the grid in areas where people really need it, because goodness knows the desire for more electric stuff is increasing exponentially. So talk us through, Eli, a little bit about how DEI, equity, sustainability are all coming together at your feet right now.
Yeah, there's a couple big ways that it's happening. So one is, utilities in a fortunate sense is, we have a defined service territory. So we tend to have pretty good relationships with our cities or counties. Not always the case, but tends to be, right? We can't get up and move, right? So our partnership and what that means is quite different than it is for others that are working with our communities directly around solutions. And so I think it's a little bit less from things like you're not really kind of changing fundamentally huge electric needs from everyone potentially at home needing a computer or anything like that. That's not going to change grid design. But you're seeing, if adding an EV really does impact to the grid, adding solar panels. So planning and trying to understand grid infrastructure to meet the needs of that evolution is really important. So utilities are trying to tackle that in different ways. Some places are seeing that much faster. We're a little bit of a laggard in that curve. Places like in the Northeast, in California, Hawaii, et cetera, are ahead in that. How exactly we're tackling that's a little bit, technical, a little bit less specific to your question. But the other part to your question is, there's also DE&I element to that too, is, there's one element that happens is that gets driven a lot by that tends to happen in areas that are higher income or areas. And, what it can do is drive more investment, additionally into higher income neighborhoods to meet and adjust those needs. And it can even further exacerbate some inequalities, and that's not a good place to be. And ideally, what you'd want to see is electrification happening more evenly. Now, fortunately, we are seeing, as there have been EVs on the road for longer, there's a bigger pool of used EVs, the prices of EVs are going down, there still are some incentives, et cetera. So hopefully some of those issues do resolve, but there's also the element of what role can a utility play in addressing some of these challenges or ensuring that we can contribute to, making sure that there's access to charging stations or solutions for communities so that it's not even further exacerbated. So things like that, electric fish project that I mentioned, that could be one type of solution amongst others. But those are really important. And it goes into as well, one of the big elements of an electric vehicle is there's no on-site emissions from it, right? So you are also getting better quality air and an environment in where that's happening. We're seeing this more and more with school buses now too. And anyone who's been in a school bus line knows how unpleasant that is if they're not electric school buses, right? So, what ways or how can we potentially as a utility help, our communities electrify faster, give them resources to figure out where to electrify, how to electrify, or make decisions on it in different ways. Maybe if a community is thinking about electrifying, maybe they could consider a factor such as what area in our community has the worst air quality, and maybe that part of a city fleet could consider electrifying first. Especially speaking very frankly in that sense of because air quality and poor air quality is something that, of course, our industry is a contributing factor to as well. So
Yeah, absolutely.
we have an obligation, I believe, to be part of these discussions and part of these solutions. And I don't think we don't want to be passive. I think we want to really be part of some of these solutions, especially one of the incredible things about electrification is it really does benefit everyone. It drives down the price of electricity because the marginal cost goes down for everyone with it. So your overall energy costs go down, right? Because you're replacing gasoline with electric, and that is a great trade-off. It is better for the environment. The overall cost of ownership of EVs is lower. Before we started recording, I was mentioning even if you're in a high fossil, so natural gas or coal region, such as MISO, the Midwest.
What does that stand for? MISO?
Yeah, Midwest Independent System Operator. So where like the large aggregator.
So that's not my miso salmon that I'll be having for dinner tonight.
No, but
or Texas, right? In the Southwest.
Well, Texas has ERCOT their own, right? But yes, if you're in an area, even if it is heavy coal or heavy natural gas, EV is still is better for the environment than internal combustion engine is. And one of the more interesting things is over time, your EV will become better for the environment as the energy profile becomes cleaner over time too, which is of course the opposite of what happens with other cars. So there's so many benefits that happen from it. So
and what's this t-shirt you're wearing say, Eli?
Because
greater than gas.
This is actually awesome. I actually got this is Austin Energy. They're a municipal company in Austin, Texas. And I got this at a meeting we had there. But yeah, it's very fitting for that. That's a coincidence. I didn't even realize.
But it's this interesting combination too, because, very recently I had Sheila Facile. She is the head of diversity and equity at Boston Medical Center. And, knowing how many pediatric cases they have of asthma coming in, and I never really put the combination together of, kind of the wheels on the bus go round and round for these kids who are getting asthma in, under-resourced communities. And then they're getting it from their own school bus at times, as those buses are idling and parking, in their neighborhoods. It's often where the depots are for these school buses that are contributing to their own kids' asthma.
And the unfortunate reality is, and it's the same as it was with lead before unleaded, and we shouldn't ignore the fact that disproportionately the negative impacts are happening at lower socioeconomic,
and that plays out on a global scale, right? We're in the middle of COP27 right now.
Less white neighborhoods. So from a DE&I lens, especially, these are really important things to tackle. And electrification is actually a really big and important way to tackle some of these, right? So the faster we electrify, the transportation sector, that makes a world of difference. So it is roughly each from power generation and transportation are both around 20-25%, somewhere in between there, of overall emissions. But over time, right, the electric sector the carbon will close from there. It won't from transportation by staying with gas. It has to electrify, right? So that will be a huge change, and it will really impact societies really, really importantly. So we have a big role to play with that, and hopefully it can continue to happen, quickly.
Fantastic. Well, as always, it's just wonderful having you on the show, Eli. So before you leave, though, I want to put you on the hot seat for a little bit. To the utility industry or the electrical industry, I want to ask you, what do you think, looking back historically, is the greatest innovation in your space in human history?
Well, I mean, the grid itself is, the largest machine in the world, right? Is the electric grid, right? So, and it's I mean, there are some interesting challenges we have because we're still using that same machine that's been designed, hundreds of years ago, and a lot of the parts are very, very old. I mean, we have the same problem with infrastructure everywhere in the United States. We were basically living off of my grandparents' generations of infrastructure, which we know is a problem in the United States. It's pretty amazing what was accomplished and built out. Now there are some challenges to how to address that and change that, and make the grid bi-directional, et cetera. But the fact that we were able to build a grid and connect, literally connect to every home and building, right, in the whole country in that way. Not everywhere fast enough, right, as we learned in history in those different sense. But what an amazing feat. And you think about, we still have challenges to this day, right, having the correct coordinates or geolocations and putting that into this modern world of geolocating and stuff, every resource we have. Imagine building and designing this hundreds of years, 100 years ago, doing all of this on paper and designing and implementing it. It's pretty unbelievable to imagine it doing it. And it does put into perspective, when we really prioritize putting, taking these huge challenges and facing, these big infrastructure needs, we've answered the call before. Now, we didn't necessarily always foresee the future challenges that we need to address down the line, right? But we are capable of doing some really amazing things, right? And I'm not sure I think we've lost some of that drive to tackle huge challenges in exciting and big ways. And that's what we need in the utility space right now and in other fields. We're capable of doing that. We just need to look to our past to remember.
I love that. Eli, how can people get in touch with you if they want to get even deeper on an innovation conversation with you?
Yeah, you could. I'm pretty slow on LinkedIn responding, but if you search Eli Gerson on LinkedIn, you will find me there. Don't get upset if it takes a couple of weeks to respond, or you could Gerson, EGERSON at Ameren, AMEREN.com. Email me directly. Happy to get in touch or chat with anyone.
Fantastic. Eli, thank you so much for this conversation today. It was awesome.
Absolutely. Great to talk to you.